Richmond's Morning News on News Radio WRVA.
Good morning, everybody. It is 8:34 here on the Voice of Virginia, News Radio WRVA. We tell you, wake up with Richmond's Morning News or play catch up the rest of the day. We just talked with Governor Glenn Youngkin, so we're going to go back-to-back people that have lived in that governor's mansion because it's time for our weekly visit with Governor Jim Gilmore, joining us here on News Radio WRVA. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Rich. Glad to be with you.
Thank you so much. Can we start internationally? I want to hear your thoughts of where we are today. Negotiations. It looks like Iran wants to come back to the bargaining table after the U.S. Navy put a real blockade and a quarantine on any shipping coming in or out of the Iranian ports.
Well, the American theory here is that if you cut off their ability to export their oil or anything else, that sooner or later there will be such economic pressure on the nation of Iran that they will then surrender at the bargaining table. I don't know that that's the case, but that's what we're doing. Remember, your listeners need to remember this. This war ostensibly was started to address 4 reasons. Well, then it was 3 reasons. It was the nuclear program that Iran had the potential to build, which had been, all their material had been buried by a previous American strike, and their capacity to use missiles to strike their opponents, usually the Israelis. And then thirdly, the question of whether or not we could force a regime change. Those are really the 3 things. Now, 4th thing has now emerged, of course, and that is the control of the Strait of Hormuz, which brings all that oil out of the Persian Gulf into the world. That was controlled now after this war by the Iranians. To counter that, President Trump has put in an American blockade in order to regulate what's going to go in and out of the Gulf. The result, of course, all this is that it's going to reduce the supply of oil worldwide. And contrary to what many people in economics are saying, it's not a matter of making it back up in America. The total world supply of oil sets the price. And right now, if you're going to take 20% out of the Middle East, out of the Persian Gulf, then that's going to, of course, increase the price of oil worldwide, no matter where it's pumped, whether it's in Texas, Canada, or the Middle East. It's just going to reduce supply, which increases the price. So that's what we're struggling with right now.
I'd also want to layer in the fact that the ghost fleet has gone away. Venezuela's not selling oil on the cheap to China as well. That means they're going to have to get that out of the worldwide market. So demand was automatically going to go up because of China's thirst for oil on the legitimate market. Couple that with what we're seeing in there. So we do have an uptick in demand from China, and we have a downtick of supply because of the Strait of Hormuz. So there's another reason why we've seen this fluctuation in the oil prices.
Well, that's right. And look, let's be clear. There are a lot of people besides Americans that or Westerners that buy this oil, particularly in Asia and particularly in China. So China is going to awaken to the fact that now their costs are going up. The good news is I think that reduces their capacity to be adventurous in the Taiwan Strait. The bad news is they sooner or later they're going to take some action on this, and we don't control exactly what China's going to do. But they can't exist long without importing oil.
I know that a lot of your focus, and again, we talk about this every week with you, the pivot in Russia and how important it is to keep them contained where they are, not having them push past Ukraine because that puts the rest of Western Europe in jeopardy. But I wanted to ask you about the relationships between the international partners that we see. I know that NATO and President Trump are arguing and they're going back and forth on what NATO looks like going into the next 250 years of America. But I also am wondering, and I wanted to get your thoughts this morning on the alliances that we see between the adversaries of the West, namely China, Russia, Cuba, Venezuela was in there, and Iran. China came out this morning and said, hey, that Strait of Hormuz needs to be opened back up. That goes contradictory to what their allies, Iran, are trying to do. I wanted to see if you could help explain that for us.
Well, no. Well, Iran would be happy to export oil to China. That's their business, and they would be happy to do that. By the way, I'm in Alexandria this morning, not Richmond. I came up last night to work with an organization called the Remembrance Society, and they put forward a program in which I was one of the speakers. One of the other speakers was Vladimir Kara-Murza, who is one of the most famous political prisoners now released here to the West. So this was a good conference we were doing in order to highlight this problem with Ukraine, which of course I talk to you about every week. But you're focused on the Middle East, and I have made it clear. I think that the Middle East war is a distraction from the pivotal point, which is Europe, and the pivotal point of Europe is Ukraine. If the Russians fail in Ukraine, then I think we're going to have a peaceful next century. If they succeed, I think we're going to have a major war in Europe, which I think is going to be detrimental to the safety and security of the United States. So I made that point, and I'm continuing to make it. Nothing has changed. But let's talk about the Middle East. So right now, again, Iran would be happy to export, and they may actually get through some of the blockade, although the United States Navy is there. By the way, this is without congressional approval, I might add. And Senator Kaine has been very strong in saying that the Constitution requires the Congress to declare war, but we're in a war. There's no doubt about that. And there's just lots of things that are up in the air right now, Rich.
Okay, let's go down that. Let's go down and talk about that for just a second. I know the War Powers Act that they've pushed across 4 times, it's come up 4 times, it's failed. And I know that Senator Kaine has his thoughts on that. But I go back to this, sir. We've been in a lot of fights and a lot of quote unquote wars over the last century. But again, I think the last time we declared war is World War II. So when the Democrats come to the Senate and the House and they want to have these resolutions, are these real, or in your opinion, are these kind of theater? And I want to make sure I put you on the record of voting this way or that way.
Well, look, I guess it's some theater because they know that they probably can't get it passed. The question about what they're doing is introducing the topic for discussions like you and I are having right now into the community as to what's the proper role of the president and the proper role of the Congress in business like this. So I think that we all agree that under the Constitution, we would want the Congress to be engaged in this. And frankly, I've made it very clear. I think the Congress is failing in its duties across the board, frankly. But we can have that conversation later on about the gerrymandering that is going on right now, of course. But no, I mean, look, a theater is one person's theater is another person's public discussion. But there isn't a lot of public discussion. It just keeps being brought up quietly and dismissed quietly. And I think that we really need to have a public discussion about what we're doing.
No, I agree with you. Again, the discourse is always the best, and that's part of American society. All right, Governor, hold tight for just a second, because I do want to come back and talk about gerrymandering and what we see. And there's a lot of people confused. The polls have come out. The yes votes currently are 5 points ahead, but independents are rejecting this by 24 points. I want to get your thoughts on that coming up this morning here.
Are you going to do that at 9 o'clock,
yeah,
Rich?
Yeah, if we could do that at 9 o'clock, that would be great. So we'll continue.
I'll stand by.
Okay, we'll continue our discussion with Governor Gilmore coming up here in just a few moments. Real quick.